Okay, you have joined the Everyday Nutrition for Health quarterly webinar series, and this is our very first webinar in our series. So we hope that you will join us for more in the future. Today's presentation is titled, Make Mealtime with Children a Success, Tips for Raising Healthy and Happy Eaters. Even though this webinar is pre-recorded, if you have questions about today's webinar, feel free to type your questions into the chat and we will collect those. Also, there is a space for submitting questions in our post survey. You will see a QR code at the end of my presentation where you can link to access that post survey and submit any questions there, and we will be responding to those. And we'll respond in a follow-up email after the webinar with those answers. Colorado State University Extension is an equal opportunity provider. Okay, again, my name is Jessica Clifford, and I am a registered dietitian and Extension State Nutrition Specialist in the Department of Food Science and Human Nutrition at Colorado State University. I'm excited to talk with you today about some research-based information and tips for raising healthy and happy eaters. From today's webinar, I hope you will learn about research-based best practices for feeding children and discover tips for how to approach potential challenges at mealtime. As I mentioned, I am a registered dietitian, but I'm also a mother and a lover of food and cooking. Yet I do want to emphasize that I do not claim to be the expert in your family or lifestyle when it comes to feeding and eating. Okay, what I talk about today is based on researched best practices, but that doesn't mean that these practices entirely are the one and only way for every person, family, or unit. There are many nuances related to feeding and eating. I recognize that things differ from person to person and family to family and culture to culture. But what I want you to think about is think of these as tools in your toolbox. Okay, they are ideas and principles that you can apply as you need. Most of the information we talk about today is referencing primarily preschool and elementary age children, but it can apply to middle school age children or older children as well, though the scenarios may be a little bit different, right? It might be slightly different because of the older age. But ultimately, I want you to know that feeding and eating should be nourishing as well as enjoyable. So here you will see an overview of what I plan to discuss today. We will touch on factors that influence food choices and behaviors to set the stage. For most of the presentation, I will discuss the division of responsibility, which refers to the responsibilities held by both the caregiver and the child when it comes to feeding and eating. I will highlight some tips for raising healthy and happy eaters. Then I will wrap up by discussing some approaches to mealtime challenges. Okay, to start off, I want to set the stage by talking just briefly about food choices and behaviors. A child's food choices and their behaviors are influenced by many things, right? From biology all the way to the environment that they're in, even as early as in the mother's womb. Biology influences food choices and behaviors. For example, children have an innate liking for sweet and an innate awareness for bitter. Children can tell when they are hungry or full, and really it's important that we allow children to do that rather than tell them. Second of all, exposure to and experience with different foods affects a child's choice and behavior around that food. Foods that parents or caregivers purchase, offer, or provide all factor into a child's exposure and experience with different foods. Third, interpersonal factors with food such as attitudes, perceptions, cultural norms, and social norms influence a child's food choices and behaviors as well. For example, if a child, much like my own child, has always enjoyed a wide variety of toppings on his pizza, but then soon discovers all his friends only request and prefer cheese pizza, he too may develop a preference for cheese pizza only. There are many more examples of this sort of thing and many nuances as well. Additionally, economics and environmental factors play a role. Things like availability, price, etc. Right? If an item is simply not available or simply too expensive for someone to afford, that food item will likely not be offered or available to a child. So these are some important things to keep in mind as we continue this presentation today. Again, I recognize that there are so many factors involved in feeding and taking care of children. So I really want to encourage you to go easy on yourself and be patient with your children as well. So today's presentation will focus mostly on the how of eating and feeding, and not so heavily on the what. I think we receive a lot of information already on what we should or shouldn't feed or eat, right? What we shouldn't feed our children or eat, but maybe not so much on the how to do it or how to approach meal times. So that's what we're going to talk about more today. Perhaps some of you have heard this term before, but many of you may have not. The division of responsibility is a term and a best practice or gold standard that we use in the nutrition world, and many pediatricians support as well, related to the responsibilities of both the parents or caregivers, as well as the responsibilities of the child when it comes to feeding and eating. So this approach was developed based on many years of research and authored by Dr. Ellen Satter, who's an internationally recognized expert on feeding and eating. So let's look at this a little bit more closely. So first, we have the responsibilities of the parent or the caregiver. And those are, first, what foods will be offered to a child to eat? Second, when or what time will those foods be offered? And third, where will those foods be offered, or where will the child eat, in what setting? Okay, then second, below that, we have the responsibilities of the child. And those are, one, whether or not the child decides to eat that food. And two, how much of that food they eat if they do decide to eat it. So research around these ideas show that if we can follow this division of responsibility with our children, they may become more competent and intuitive eaters, meaning they feel comfortable with food and have a healthy relationship with food and approach to eating. This can help set them up for success as adults as well. And not only that, but also following these recommendations may make for a successful and enjoyable mealtime with the child or children. So let's look at these responsibilities a little bit more in detail in the next few slides. So the first responsibility of a parent is the what, right? What foods will be offered? Spaghetti with tomato sauce, or will it be tacos for dinner? It is our responsibility to provide the foods that provide nourishment for our children, but also allow for some treats to enjoy as well, if that's possible. While this will look different for every family, there are some guidelines about what is recommended for a healthy and balanced dietary pattern, and we'll touch base on that very briefly in the next slide. But it is up to us as caregivers to provide those foods that we want our children to consume. You might know that your child prefers certain foods, and you may or may not choose to offer those, depending on what you know is best for your child. For example, will you offer a peanut butter and jelly sandwich every single day because you know your child loves it and will eat it? Or will you switch it up because you know that you want variety in your child's diet? So sometimes you offer a turkey sandwich, and maybe sometimes you offer a hummus and vegetable wrap. It is good to offer foods multiple times in many forms or ways and in many settings to increase acceptance. I do want to emphasize, though, that it is normal for children to have some sort of innate or natural pickiness. And we need to consider the nature versus nurture there and how we're setting them up for success versus what's just naturally part of their biology. Don't become a short order chef, though. Okay, choose the meal or snack that you will offer and stick with that. If your child is more on the picky side at a meal, it can help to offer one or two foods within reason, of course, that you know that your child will eat. Okay, but don't feel that you need to cater solely to your child's desires. Once children realize that you will make one meal or snack and only one, and you will allow them to choose to eat it or not, as we'll soon hear about, they will be likely to slowly accept that. And if they don't already, it will take time and we need to be patient and calm, but we really don't need to stress about that. Okay, so in terms of the what, generally speaking, we should aim to offer a variety of foods from each of these food groups listed here. We have fruits, vegetables, grains, protein, and dairy. And according to the USDA, an ideal plate would consist of half fruits and vegetables, and then the remainder would be split between grains and protein, plus a serving of dairy on the side. Some families may not eat foods from all of these food groups due to beliefs or intolerances or allergies, and that's okay. Okay, everyone's plate will look different, but in general, my plate serves as a guide and a good tool for what to offer children. I'm not going to go into how much from each of these food groups children should eat because it's different for different ages and genders, but I will point out that kids need less food than adults, generally speaking. For example, a half sandwich may be more appropriate for a child than a whole sandwich, right? It just depends. The website, myplate.gov, offers some great information for how much, what types, and alternatives to these foods should be considered to make sure that we and our children are getting the nutrients our bodies need through foods. So I encourage you to check it out if you've not already. I do want to take an extra moment to emphasize the importance of variety in our diets. Variety really is key to any healthy eating pattern. Foods and nutrients act synergistically, so they work together in our bodies. And different food groups offer different nutrients and benefits. And different foods within those food groups offer different nutrients and benefits from each other. So focus on offering a variety of foods among different food groups and also a variety of foods within different food groups. Often when thinking about variety in terms of fruits and vegetables, choosing a variety of colors can really help. You have probably heard the term or the phrase, eat a rainbow. Generally phytonutrients, so the nutrients that come from plants, present themselves in the form of a color. So the more colors of a produce a child consumes, the more nutrients they are likely getting. So next we will touch on the when of feeding. As caregivers, it's our responsibility to decide when mealtime or snack time will be. Establishing a routine can be really helpful for children and for parents. This way, children know what to expect and are more likely to experience hunger and fullness, which is really important in self-regulating consumption. It's not recommended to allow a child to graze throughout the day. Okay, the challenge with this is that if a child is allowed to graze at their own will, they may not actually ever feel hunger. Okay, and then when it comes time to eating a meal or a snack that's intentionally planned for nourishment, they may not actually eat it because they're not feeling hungry at that time. Additionally, if a child is not feeling hungry, they may not be able to focus on the meal, and it could cause for a more disruptive mealtime. So setting some consistent structure around timing of meals and snacks can be really helpful. Of course, this doesn't have to be perfect all the time. There are things in life that don't always allow for us to have the same set meal time or snack times on a day-to-day basis. So some flexibility is okay. Okay, but once you develop some sort of routine around time, your children will know what to expect and may be less likely to constantly request snacks or complain about being hungry or not being hungry, as they will know what to expect. I'm not saying that they will never whine about it again, because they will, but there will be less aggravation and stress, right, when everyone is aware of the expectations. Okay, the third responsibility of the caregiver is establishing where the meal or snack will be served. In what setting will you allow your child to eat? Will it be at the table, a picnic table, or a picnic on the floor outside, or perhaps a stool at the counter? Setting expectations about where a meal or snack is eaten helps encourage mindful eating, whether it's intentional or not. Avoid letting your child walk around while he or she eats, or eat in front of a screen or other distractions. This can lead to mindless eating, where a child may eat more than he or she is hungry for. Okay, or they may have a hard time eating at all and then suggest they're hungry shortly thereafter. It is recommended to eat together at the table as a family or a unit as much as possible. Research shows that this practice has many health benefits, not only for physical health, but mental health as well. Like I said before, it doesn't have to be perfect every single day for every single meal, but establishing these general routines and expectations will benefit health overall in the long run. Now, if your child, like plenty of children, has a hard time sitting in a chair at dinner time, just have them stand at the table. Mainly, you want them to be at the table with their attention on the meal and people and not something else. Okay, so now we will move on to the responsibilities of a child when it comes to eating. The first responsibility of a child is to decide whether or not they want to take and eat certain food that is being offered. This really needs to be the choice of the child and not the parent or caregiver, as hard as it may seem. We need to let the child feed him or herself. It is our job to offer the nourishment. It is their job to decide what to take of it. Most importantly, never force the food on a child. This really can backfire, making them resist it even more, and it can lead to an unhealthy relationship with food and eating now as well as later in life. If a child refuses a food, simply say, okay, and move on. Okay, there's no reason to argue with your child here, no reason to get stressed out, just let it be. Food neophobia, so the fear of new foods, peaks between ages 2 and 6, and it's a very normal thing. Many of you have probably heard that it can take 15 to 20 exposures for a child to accept a new food, and even more before they begin to actually enjoy it. So we've got to continue to re-expose them. There may be periods where your child may only eat carbohydrate foods or some other food group, or not eat any vegetables for a period of time. And I know how hard that can be as a parent to allow your kids not to eat their vegetables, but they won't develop a nutritional deficiency in a matter of 2 weeks, right? Just keep offering it. It is about setting them up for success over time. And your child will flip-flop back and forth between liking something and not. They may eat a food regularly for 2 years and then one day just say, no, I don't like that. It's okay to let that be, okay? It is best not to react strongly to those sort of things. Okay, the second responsibility of a child is to determine how much of a food they want to eat. So if they do indeed decide they want to try a food, they may choose to eat one bite or all of it or any amount in between. Your child may eat more than you think is okay or less than you think is okay, but we need to allow them to make that decision for themselves. It is a good idea to start with smaller portions for this reason, so that you avoid waste. If a child does decide they want to try food, okay, just let them put a small amount on their plate or put a small amount on their plate for them, and then they can always get more if they want. When a child decides that they have eaten enough food, let them be done. If you feel they have not eaten enough to be satisfied, you may ask and gently remind them that there will be no more food until dinner time or snack time or breakfast time, whatever comes next, but don't pressure or go on and on about it, okay? But also don't offer a food handout right after the meal when they say they're hungry. Wait until the next snack or mealtime. Okay, so now I want to share 10 tips, many, if not all, which tie into the division of responsibility that we just talked about and help to foster successful mealtime and healthy eating habits. Some may have already been mentioned briefly, so pardon any redundancy, but a lot of them are some new tips. Okay, so first, remain neutral about foods. Avoid labeling foods as good or bad. Of course, we can talk with our children about what foods our bodies need versus what foods we may enjoy, but that our bodies don't necessarily need. However, categorizing them as good or bad can lead to guilt when we eat those, right? Some of them, which can interfere with a healthy relationship with food. Similarly, avoid scolding when a child doesn't try or eat a food. okay? And avoid praise when they do. Okay, we want to allow children to discover their preferences and learn these skills on their own. If they try a new food, just say, "Oh, I see you tried it. What do you think?" Rather than saying, "Oh, good job. I'm so proud of you." Number 2, don't restrict foods. Restricting foods can lead to deprivation and overeating or overdoing it and binging. Now, of course, you are not going to just let your child have candy and sweets or whatever it is all the time at their free will, but you don't want to restrict it altogether or too tightly. Allowing them treats is okay and can be part of a healthy eating pattern. Be a good role model. Do that which you want your child to do, right? Eat the same foods in the same place and at the same time when possible. This is where making one meal can be really helpful. Everyone is offered the same foods in a shared setting. Okay, monkey see, monkey do. Offer foods multiple times in many forms and in many settings. We already touched on this a bit, but we know that experience and exposure is a big part of acceptance. As I mentioned, it can take 15 to 20 exposures for a child to accept a new food and even more before they begin to enjoy it. 5, allow your child to feed himself. Okay, this encourages autonomy and competence in eating. Never force a food. Okay, like I said before, this can backfire, making them resist that food even more. And it can lead to an unhealthy relationship with food and eating now as well as later in life. If a child refuses a food, like I said, just say okay and move on, okay? There's no reason to stress about it, no reason to argue about it, just let it be. Let them make their own decisions about what to eat. Doing this takes the responsibility and stress off of us. Okay. I also want to point out that when parents stop or caregivers stop doing this, they often find that children may begin to eat or at least try some of those foods that we were trying to force in the first place. Okay. They may do it more willingly on their own. Number 7, establish routines and be consistent about where, when, and how. Okay. It's often more pleasant when everyone knows what to expect. Eat together as a family or as a unit as much as possible and avoid distractions while eating. This encourages mindful eating and lets us pay better attention to our innate hunger and fullness cues, okay, as well as supports our mental health, just being together as a unit or family. Number 9, avoid offering food for emotional comfort or as a reward. If a child is having a tantrum, try to avoid giving food to satisfy them. Okay, this way they don't learn to rely on food for emotional comfort as they grow, which is really not a healthy coping mechanism as we get older. Avoid phrases like, "If you eat your vegetables, you can have dessert." This sort of comment or expectation assumes that vegetables can't be enjoyed without dessert. Okay, it also implies that maybe dessert is like a reward for something. And lastly, get your child involved in cooking, involved in the selection, the preparation, as well as the cooking of the food. Okay, having a say in what foods might be served at a meal or a snack gives those children some buy-in. For example, you may say to your child, "Which of these vegetables should we choose for dinner tomorrow?" And then you give them 2 or 3 different options to choose from. Being involved in the preparation process really does increase child's likeliness to try foods and actually like those foods. So get them involved as much as you're able. Okay, so now I'd like to wrap up the presentation by presenting some potential challenges you may face at mealtime and offer some suggestions for how to respond to those challenges. So we'll go through a couple scenarios here before we wrap up. So let's say it's mealtime and your child says, "I'm not hungry." How might you respond to that? Don't make him eat. You might say something like, "You don't have to eat, but please sit at the table with us for a little bit while we eat." But then let's say that child comes asking for food right after dinner has been cleaned up. Don't give him a food handout. Okay? Wait until snack time or the next meal time and tell him, we will have snack or meal in a little bit and you can have something to eat then. If it's at dinner time, you may also choose to keep that child's meal aside for a short time after the meal. So if they get hungry, you can offer that meal again. But when you clean up, okay? And I recognize your child might get upset by this, and let them be upset, okay? Over time, they will learn the routine. Your child is being picky about a certain food or says, I don't want this, or I want something else. What might you do in that case? Don't make something else or make her feel bad about not eating it. I suggest you say something like, you don't have to eat it, just say no thank you. There are other foods on the table or on your plate you can eat if you are hungry. This is why I suggest that people always try to offer at least 1 or 2 foods that your child generally eats so that they always have something to eat at the meal, even if they don't prefer some of the foods. You could encourage her to try it, but don't make her and don't pressure after one simple short request. What if the child eats a good amount and asks for more? Don't deny him more food. If there is food remaining, allow him to have more of the food that he is requesting. If there's no more of that food, offer more of another food that was prepared for dinner. But again, if they're feeling like they're hungry, we should allow them to eat some more. What if a child intentionally throws, drops, or spills food for fun to get a rise out of you? And I'm not talking here about food play with young toddlers, which is very accepted and actually good. I'm talking about older children who do this intentionally to get a rise out of you. Well, first of all, don't laugh or yell. Okay, take a deep breath and remain calm. I know how frustrating that can be. Ignore her, and if it persists, give one warning, then have her be finished. Okay, if she was hungry, she would eat the food. Okay, last one. What if a child spits food out or makes a gross face or a nasty negative comment about food? Again, don't yell, remain calm. Maybe say something like, we don't spit food or make those kind of comments when trying a food. You don't want to yuck my yum. If you don't like it, that is okay. Just say, I don't prefer it. Okay. You might show him how to politely get rid of the food in his mouth by putting it in a napkin rather than spitting it out. Okay, I would say that you should encourage them not to use negative words to talk about foods. It's okay to talk about it, but rather use words that include their senses, like it feels mushy in my mouth, it tastes sour, it tastes bitter, it smells strong. Okay, you might ask them, what would make it taste better? Okay, if they say they don't like a food, what would make it taste better? Or what on your plate do you like better? Okay, trying to bring the conversation around to have a more positive spin on it. It is okay if they don't like something. What's important really is how they respond to not liking it. Okay, so with regards to all of these tips and suggestions we just went through, again, I know this may seem hard or different than what you may be used to. I want to emphasize that these are all tools for your toolbox. Things don't have to be perfect. Okay, most of all, regarding feeding and mealtime, we want to stick with our responsibilities as caregivers, allow our children to have their responsibilities, be consistent, remain calm, and just enjoy mealtime. Okay, well, that wraps up my presentation today. I hope that gives you some useful tools and tips to raise healthy and happy eaters. Again, thank you for attending today's webinar, and I wish you great success at mealtime. Please go to this link or scan the QR code to access our post survey, where you can also submit any questions that you have regarding today's webinar. Then we will be addressing those questions and responding in a follow-up email with answers after the webinar. We hope to see you next time.